Hello, and welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving, where we're putting human back in human capital solutions. On today's episode, we're going to hear from an industry leader, where they're sharing their thoughts, feedback, and perspective on what's happening in today's world of work. Well, let's stay tuned and perk our ears up for another exciting episode. Well, welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving. I couldn't be more excited for all of our listeners, our community out there for this week's episode. My name is Darren Thevathasan. I'm with the Thorough Group. We're a human capital solutions recruitment firm supporting the biotech, pharma, med device, and medical technology sectors. And I'm going to pass it over to my partner, Sean Burrows, to introduce himself.
Darren, great to see you. And man, I could not be more excited for today's episode. It's going to be an incredible opportunity that we are so thankful for to speak with one of the true leaders, I believe, in really where we are going within the biotechnology industry. And we're so thrilled to be able to speak to a woman who's not only a great leader, but a great person and has done such an incredible job in growing and building a career that many would say would be good enough. But, she's continued to have great dreams and vision and leadership moving forward. And so, we have Nancy Whiting is joining us today, and she's the president and CEO of Recruiting Pharma, which is based in San Diego. You may understand or see the name and say, wait, I know that from somewhere. Not only are they doing great early development work now, but they were just recently announced as one of Fierce Biotech's Fierce 15 for 2024, which is quite a recognition for the work that she and her team have been doing now for quite some time, actually, Nancy. And she serves on the board of directors also for Caribou Biosciences and Boundless Biosciences as well. She spent the last 15 years prior to this role where she was at Seagen and played a very key pivotal role in the development and regulatory approval of many different products for lymphoma, bladder cancer, breast cancer, cervical cancer, and other areas as well. And so, Nancy, we are thrilled to have you joining us today. Welcome to Thoroughly Thriving. So glad to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks so much. It's really exciting to be here and great to chat with you.
Sean, I think it probably would have been shorter to list the things that Nancy hasn't done.
Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right.
Wow. Couldn't be more excited. Well, Nancy, I had the pleasure of sitting down with you in your office last month, and I gotta say, I left our meeting inspired, invigorated, with a new charge. There was so much identification that resonated with me with what you shared of how you really look at business, how you set culture, and how you create that atmosphere. And as I reflect back on the time that we spent together, leadership is one of the key tenets and components that I know underpins everything that you really operate from. So I'm curious if you could share with our listeners what are a few leadership principles that you live and lead by?
I became interested in leadership, I would say probably like over 20 years ago, as I was an assistant medical director, so kind of an entry level role into the pharmaceutical industry. And it really kind of, I all of a sudden in that role, I've been in other roles previously where I was an individual contributor, but not really leading teams or an integral member, a member of like a multidisciplinary drug development team. And so about 20 years ago, when I became my first role as an assistant medical director, I realized, oh, now I am actually supposed to be leading these teams. And that made me go, while I had studied, of course, very hard in school, my undergraduate and graduate degrees, no one ever, and I learned a ton about science and medicine and pharmaceuticals and in my degrees and my professional education, I literally had zero training on leadership. I didn't actually know what made a good leader or a bad leader. And like most things, I wanted to be successful as a leader and thought I better learn how to lead and I better learn what makes a good leader and what makes a less good leader so that I can do the things that will make me successful. So I really started trying to learn about leadership and really became a student of leadership. I read a lot of books. I observed a lot of leaders that I was engaged with, leaders of my company, leaders of other teams, leaders of my department, etc. And really found my way to a philosophy of leadership called servant leadership. There's a lot of interesting books on this. I would encourage folks to go ahead and pick up one. There's one book for me that just really crystallized the thinking and kind of, it's called The Seven Pillars of Servant Leadership. And it really just resonated with me in terms of who I was as a human being and my values outside of my work values, but my core personal values. This concept of servant leadership really resonated. And then I happened to work with many great leaders, and one of them was a gentleman named Dennis Benjamin, who at the time was a leader in the R&D organization at CGen. And Dennis gave me this little snippet, this little saying that really, in my mind, crystallizes the core tenets of servant leadership. And what he shared with me was this concept of it's the men, the mission, and then me. And it needs to always be in that order. And
Wow.
I think it's so true. And what I mean by that is the men, it's not just the men, it's the women too, but it's your team, right? It's your people.
Yeah.
If you put your people first, they will achieve your mission, the mission. And if the mission is achieved, personal success will follow. But it has to be in that order. You have to lead in that order. If you put your mission first, you will burn out your men, and they might be there for the first challenge that comes your way, but they won't be there for the second or the third. And without that continuity, that leadership, that continuity of team, you're much less likely to succeed. So you can't put the mission first. Your men won't be there to fulfill it. And you absolutely cannot put yourself first, right? If you put yourself first, people don't want to follow that leader, right? They can see that. They see through that you're not actually caring about their development and their growth and their opportunities. And they will also vote with their feet and leave. So, and while you might have some short-term success, you will not have long-term success. So for me, it was very intuitive, the men, the mission, then me. And that's really how I've tried to lead, for the last sort of, I would say 15, 18 years since I kind of figured this out. And I've had opportunities to test it in real life situations and realize that it actually is the best way to lead teams and lead now organizations. And sometimes you have to remind yourself because when you're under stress, you don't always act your best. And sometimes even myself, I have to go, wait a second. I have to put the people first, then put the mission second, and then myself last. And putting the people first doesn't mean like everybody gets a giant bonus at the end of the year. Everybody gets 25 PTO days a year. It's not about giving freebies. It's not about free lunch and ping pong tables, right? It's about clarity of mission. Like, what are we trying to do and why are we trying to do it? It's about being transparent and trusting your team with the information that they need to be successful in their job. It's about being authentic and vulnerable, acknowledging like, I don't have all the answers. I know I'm in charge, but I don't have all the answers. What do you think, right? It's holding people accountable because A players want to work with A players. So if people aren't performing, you need to work with that person to try to hold them accountable to this higher standard. And it's also about recognizing and being thankful and showing gratitude for the hard work that people put in. So putting people first, they will achieve the mission. And once the mission, if the mission is achieved, then personal success follows. So that's it
Wow.
in a nutshell.
Wow, that's amazing, Nancy. And knowing some of the people on your team personally, I know that you really don't just talk about it as a technique or a good practice, but it's something that you actually execute organizationally. I know many of the people on your team just absolutely love working for you. I'm going to pivot a little bit in question two here and talk about our current environment in, biotechnology. It's not a lot of rainbows and unicorns and butterflies out there, but you've pioneered a new company, over the last couple of years in this environment and have really led through in an area where others have not had, the level of growth and development that you guys have been able to achieve. Can you tell me a little bit about, what have been some of the greatest challenges or depending on how you look at it, opportunities you've been able to find in launching a new biotech in this current environment that we're in?
Well, it has been really hard. When I made the decision to leave a pretty, good job at CGen, pretty comfortable where I was, to kind of take this leap of faith to join a, less than 20-person startup company at the time. I knew intellectually it was going to be challenging. I guess I didn't really know until you're in it, like most things, how challenging things would actually become. Um, but it's been amazing and exciting and exhilarating, and definitely been a bit of a roller coaster. Of course, in 2021, when I made the decision to do this, we were still riding the post-COVID high. Biotech had just saved the world, literally, and our valuations of companies was way up. Money was flowing into the sector, and it really felt like, wow, this is a really great time to come and be a private biotech. And yeah, I'll go and raise a bunch of money and we'll go and do great things. And then near the end, second half of the last quarter of 2021, reality hit. Like most things, a bit of a bubble had formed, and then, that bubble had started to contract. And moving into 2022, we now call it biotech winter. It was a terrible time to be any kind of a company in biotech, right? Funding had dried up. It was really challenging. There was a lot of real challenges. And I was in a place where we needed to raise capital. We were running out of the initial seed money that we had, and it became pretty clear that the traditional way of going out and getting venture capital money wasn't going to be open to us. We had started this company with an idea, right? It wasn't technology that came in from a university. It was really an idea on a piece of paper, and we made great progress. But our starting point was an idea, right? It wasn't like we had something already. So while we'd been in business for 2 years, we didn't really have a lot to show for it, to be frank. We had to build our platform before we could actually have compounds that could actually show that we can drug these targets we were trying to drug. And so we were in this really challenging position of having really limited access to capital and not the kind of, advanced programs that were getting funded. So had to find a way to bring in some more money, also accelerate our progress so that we could get far enough along where now we could have compounds that could be funded, that were being recognized as solving the challenge we'd started off to solve. So I had to do two things. And this is kind of what I think is the exciting part of biotech, is you have to be scrappy, and you have to hustle, and you have to work every angle. But that pressure actually leads to really great discoveries, and is really exhilarating. So I looked around and said, what can we do, right? So the alternative for money from Wall Street and venture capitalists is from pharma. And I had done a lot of business development work in my prior life. And so we started talking to pharma partners about bringing in some non-dilutive capital. It would also potentially validate our approach, so that those investors who were like, oh, you're too early, you're too risky, this might help allay some of their concerns. And so kicked off a process to do a business development deal. And we were successful. We signed that deal last July, and that really is what was being recognized with the Fierce 15 that you alluded to at the beginning of the show. And we were able to actually do a very competitive deal, one of the largest business development deals for an early stage asset that has been done. That took the pressure off, so we didn't need to go and raise capital in this really bad environment. The second thing we did was looked really hard at what we were doing and tried to create some, prioritization. So at the time, we were developing two targets, STAT3 and STAT6, each for both cancer and inflammation. So essentially it was 4 programs in parallel. Oh. Now, I had just spent 15 years developing drugs for cancer, in particular for lymphoma. And our first 2 programs are STAT3 for cancer, for both STAT3 and STAT6 for oncology indications, were both great lymphoma opportunities. And personally, I was so attached and connected to those therapeutic areas and to the scientific potential of drugs for oncology. that was a big part of why I came to this company even. But as we looked at less than 30 people at the time spread across 4 programs, what became very clear was that we were stretched really thin. And by being stretched really thin, we were diluting our effort. And that if we focused all of our people, all of our top talent, everybody here was the top talent. So if we put our best people, which was everybody, on our biggest opportunities, perhaps we could accelerate our progress and actually get to that next milestone data faster. And in this environment, we had to do that. We just couldn't wait. We didn't have the luxury of time. We had to accelerate to show that we could solve those problems we'd set out to solve. So we had to make a really tough decision. We looked very carefully and in an unbiased manner. I put my passion for lymphoma to the side and said, let's evaluate these 4 opportunities independently. Let's think about them strategically. Let's think about them from a market size potential. Let's think about them from an unmet medical need potential. Let's think about them from a competitive landscape potential and rank them. And when we did that analysis, what became clear was, the other important thing, what did our own data tell us? What was the likelihood of success based on the data we had? And when we looked at that, we realized that actually the 2 better options were STAT3 and STAT6 in immunology.
Wow.
So we refocused the team on and just put everybody out working on those 2 programs. And it worked. We accelerated the pace of our development. We achieved more. We accomplished more. And, we're, of course, working on really big unmet needs that are really important. It was hard for some people. It was hard. I was probably the hardest person I had to convince was myself to walk away from oncology at this time, right? But as someone told me many years ago, no doesn't mean no, not ever. It just means no, not now. And so we'll come back to it. We'll do it at a later date. There's opportunity there. And I think still these targets make sense for cancer drugs. But by putting all of our efforts, we were able to accelerate our development. And that has been really important to demonstrate that our platform can work. So I think, those have been kind of the biggest challenges over the last couple of years. And sorry, one last challenge, and that would be building the right team. So, again, when we made this change from focus on both cancer and immunology to immunology only, I realized I'm a cancer drug developer. Most of the team were cancer drug developers. So it was critical that we hired and brought in that expertise, because you have to really have deep subject matter knowledge and matter expertise in the organization. So we brought in, 2 really important key hires that had that experience. And that has, really also allowed us to accelerate our growth. But, as in most cases, when you are under pressure, that's where evolution happens, right? And it was very similar, right? The pressure of not being able to access capital as easily forced us to make hard decisions, which actually ultimately, I think, accelerated our growth and progress. And so, while I hope that the next 2 years aren't the same kind of funding environment we've just gone through, I know that actually it's allowed us to really focus our efforts, and we're probably better than we would have been had we been, trying to do too much over the last couple of years.
Incredible story, Nancy. I love to hear just how you guys have, reacted and responded rather than just sitting in a place of, just holding out. Maybe it'll get better. Let's take a proactive response and figure that out. I think it's amazing what you guys have done and accomplished.
Yeah, well, you have to, right? Like, you have to be in control of your own destiny. I mean, at the end of the day, we develop drugs for really serious indications. And if it was easy, we would have cured these diseases, right? So, and we haven't. So, it takes hard work, and it's hard enough, I guess what I'm trying to say, it's hard enough to make drugs to solve these challenging unmet medical needs. So you have to control what you can control. And that's where, having options. Well, if that fails, we're going to do this. And if this fails, we're going to do that. I remember listening to a podcast of a CEO many years ago. And she said on this, when I was kind of getting ready to step into senior leadership roles, And she made this comment that you should only have a plan A, because if you have a plan B or a plan C, you're not putting all your focus on plan A, and you'll fail.
Oh,
And I remember listening to that and thinking, gosh, that's really not what I do. I have a plan A, B,
yeah.
C, D, and sometimes E, right? Because what we're trying to, like, this is hard, right? Like, stuff happens and you have to be able to react. And if you don't have a plan B or C, you end up taking time to figure out how to respond. Instead, you're like, oh, I have a playbook for that. I'm going to go off and do it. So I remember listening to that going, I really don't agree with that. But it made me think about it. And what I realized for me and for our organization, and I think for my employees, knowing that we have plans that will cover majority of the rainy day scenarios gives confidence. And even if we never pull those plans off the shelf, I personally feel less anxious knowing that, okay, if that happens, I know how to react. We have a plan identified. We know where we'll go. And having those options already articulated gives you, I just think, more confidence and more flexibility. And I think your employees feel it and recognize that. And the team feels more confident when they know that, it's not going to all go perfectly, but if things do, go in a direction we're not happy about, we know how to get out of it. We know where to go from that. So I think it's the responsible thing to have, the plan B and C and D.
You're talking to two planners, Nancy, so we absolutely understand.
Oh, I completely subscribe to that school of thought. So I hear you loud and clear. And as you were just sharing your thoughts on that last question that Sean asked you, Nancy, the one thing that resonated for me is change. Change is absolutely constant. And my uncle, who is a mentor of mine in so many different facets in life and in business, he shared with me, he said, Darren, when the rate of change outside exceeds the rate of change inside, the end is in
Mm.
sight. And what I just heard you share about is the foresight that you had to go an inch wide and a mile deep, right? And with the four programs that you were running. And you also shared, from what I was able to discern, really following what you just mentioned in the first question we asked you by putting the men first, the mission second, and then yourself
Yeah.
last. And so it's just a really good reminder, Nancy, that change is constant. If change is happening, whether I choose to
Yeah.
accept it or not, and pulling those playbooks off the shelf is something that we do often here at Thorough Group. So I hear you loud and clear. Um, Nancy, as you kind of take a step back and maybe zoom up into the stratosphere, um, and think about where we were just over the last, call it 3 years. And it's been such an interesting climate out there. I've been in the biotech, pharma, life science industry at large for 20 plus years. But where do you see the next 2 to 3 years in our industry heading? If you were to break out your
Uh,
crystal ball, and if we were able to peel back the curtain a bit, where do you see the next 2 to 3 years heading in our
yeah,
industry?
I think there's some really good things that I'm seeing that I'm really excited about, and I think there's, for those who are willing to learn the lessons of 2020 and 2021, I think some really good opportunities there too. So I think one of the things we saw in 2020 and 2021 was too much Me Too, right? So too much, piling on. Okay, this is what Wall Street's, this is a therapeutic area Wall Street is rewarding. So let's have 20 companies doing that, right? Or people saying, and there's a little, I spent 15 years on antibody drug conjugates, and I love antibody drug conjugates, but people saw Sugen got bought for $43 billion. Let's do antibody drug conjugates, and I think there's tons of potential there. I'm not saying that there isn't. I'm just saying, how many ADC companies do we really need? How much innovation is there enough innovation for all of those companies to innovate, or is there going to be duplication and kind of that bubble start to build again? So I think if we learn the lesson of like what we went through, similar thing with CAR T companies, right? Like if we think about it, right, Innovation is challenging and it is scary and it is higher rate of failure. But that is really what, first of all, patients need, right? They don't need the 27th PD-1 inhibitor. There's some really good ones right now. That's great. We need, innovation to drive the next wave of transformative therapies. And it's good for our business, right? Because having innovative companies allows each one to succeed, and we avoid building, avoid that bubble. So I'm hopeful that we will have learned our lesson and that we will invest in and build companies that are doing innovative sciences, that are not doing Me Too's, that are really solving the serious challenges that patients need, and providing therapies that for those patients. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a healthcare provider. Like I am still a licensed pharmacist. I haven't given up my pharmacy license for a reason, right? We're here to solve problems for the patients, right, and for their families, and allow them to live longer and fuller and better lives. And so that's the core of what we do every day. Yes, it's a business. Yes, it's financially successful when it works, but that can't be what drives us. And so if we put that patient first at the heart of what we do, then we should be innovating, because that's where the next transformative medicine will come from. So I'm really hopeful that we as an industry will have learned this lesson and will continue to innovate, and that the funders, right, the investors and whatnot, will recognize and reward innovation, and not kind of follow like lemmings, sort of Me Too technology. I'm really excited that it seems like there's being significant investments being made in like cardiovascular metabolic. I think the whole Monjaro, what's the other, Ozempic,
Yeah.
has really helped, right, recognize that these are diseases. Like, I think 10 years ago, if you said you were going to do obesity or diabetes, people would be like,
Hmm.
but there's so much need in our society and around the world for medicines that help people be healthy and live longer, right? So excited to see CV metabolic, neuroscience. We've seen some really great new drugs being developed for Alzheimer's and other serious neuroscience diseases. So that's exciting. I has always been something. Of course, I'm doing that, and it's
Yeah.
always been something that's been important. But we need better therapies, and then of course oncology, which we'll continue to do. So it's nice to see you know the continued development of focus on newer therapeutic areas where there's a real need. I think there's some real challenges we have ahead, and like one of the ones that I think a lot about, given my business model, which is to use a lot of outsourced work in China, is the Biosecure Act,
Mhm.
and that is something that we're all still, those of us who do a lot of work in China, are still kind of trying to figure out. It's happening to us, right? We are going
Mhm.
to, legislators have recognized that the supply of our medicines is a critical part of our infrastructure, which as a healthcare provider, I agree with. I think, of course, I want to make sure that, that my husband can have his life-saving insulin, that I can have my life-saving medicines
Yeah.
that I need, and like that everybody has access to them. And so but we have outsourced a lot of work there. And so that's a big challenge to figure out, how do we continue to innovate with the price that we're paying for that innovation right now, which is significantly less doing work in China than it would be here in the US, and still ensure we have access to medicines, access to all of our critical medicines. So there's some challenges ahead of us, but I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I'm excited about the next couple of years for sure
Wow.
for our industry.
Nancy, I love the perspective about opportunities and for those willing to learn the lessons. I think that that is so key, and I think something that's often overlooked in times of, whatever you would want to call them, great success, right? Where people tend to gloss over and we just keep moving, things are going well. And, we don't often realize that most of the greatest successes are those that are built in times of challenge, that are built in times of, like it wasn't easy, it wasn't simple, it wasn't, exactly the way we would want it. And yet that led to such innovation that was developed that, led us forward. And I think there are so many people that are so passionate. I love what you said too about I and I. I've seen a huge trend in that as well, in terms of just even as we see pivoting, companies that are moving away from, even in some of the cell therapies and things, more into autoimmune and more into other areas, and spreading into those, which I think is really exciting. And we get the unique spot to view and have a vantage point over the industry from what we do, in that we mostly support, frankly, the emerging, kind of small to mid-sized company, where we are having a lot of the conversations, with leaders like yourself, road mapping and planning. And, I had a conversation last week with client who came to me and said, "Hey, like, we're trying to reorg our entire leadership team moving forward for what we're going to do," and basically brought us in as like an outside counsel alongside their executive team to give some advice on what we've seen with other organizations and what's worked and what's not. And I think, to your point, innovation in the face of challenge and difficulty, we're going to see the people that learn those lessons, really rise to the top and see a lot of great success. I think it's incredible. And I love your vantage point on it of like, hey, if we're willing to learn, we can, be the ones that lead into this next generation, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, another little uh, uh, phrase I heard for the first time. Maybe others have heard it before, but I heard it for the first time a couple weeks ago, was the pioneers get slaughtered and then the settlers arrive. And it's kind of true for biotech. It is hard to be that innovator, right? It's easier to be the settler than the pioneer, but patients need pioneers, right? We need to do this if we want to make a dent in serious illness and improve the lives of all of us, our families, and it touches everybody.
Yeah.
So, serious disease touches all of us. So we have to have the courage to be the pioneers, even knowing that it may not go well. But to your point, as long as you're learning from, I'm a strong believer in a learning culture and in, a lifelong learner myself. As long as I'm learning, I think we'll be able to, even if we get slaughtered, it will be better the next
Yeah,
time.
well, thanks so much. And I know, even just having you on the podcast, I know there's going to be people that are going to get learnings from this that I think will inspire many. I think it's interesting that you brought up listening to a leader's podcast when you were preparing for your career. And our hope is that just even having you on, that people will, engage in this podcast and have that same type of revelation moment for themselves, for growing and developing the future of their career. It's great when things can kind of come full circle. Well, I've got one additional question I want to go into, and then I'll maybe let Darren wrap into. But you made the transition from, one geographic area to another as you started Recruitics. You moved from Seattle down to San Diego, and you had to reset yourself into a brand new biotech ecosystem. One of the big trends we're seeing in 2024 is really a return to work culture for a lot, or return to office culture, excuse me, for a lot of companies. And so that includes a lot of searches where, clients have asked us for, this person, that person, but hey, we want them to come into the office, whatever it might be, whether it's once a week, whether it's 3 times a week, or regularly 5 times a week. Every organization has a different culture that they're trying to establish in that. But I think for people even listening to the podcast, are considering and weighing, do I relocate to another geography for a job with a great company? And if I do, those that present some challenges when you've built your entire network, your career, a lot of the ecosystem around you has been in one geographic place. Now, obviously, we're a big global world. We're recording this from different geographies ourselves, but as people make that transition, what has that transition been like for you, coming from Seattle and getting plugged into San Diego that was already, a pretty established ecosystem? But, I've had multiple conversations with leaders from different organizations, but I thought that great thing, bring up your name, and I'm going, hey, how do you two know yeah, and all of these great transitions and things. So can you share maybe a little bit with our audience around what that transition's been like for you and how you've so effectively plugged into the biotech ecosystem in San Diego?
Yeah, sure. I actually love change. I might be an unusual. I have some, mutation somewhere that turned on the change
Yeah.
gene, but I love change. So I was actually really excited to make this move and like start from scratch. I'd done it a few other times in my life. So I moved from Vancouver, British Columbia, where I grew up, to Cardiff, Wales, and knew nobody. And that was really fun. And then I moved to Northern Ireland. And I did it again. And then I moved to Seattle from Vancouver, and I knew nobody. And so it's actually really exciting. So this wasn't the first time I'd done it, and I kind of had a bit of a playbook. But it was actually the first time my husband had done it. And that was pretty interesting to see. So I just networked the heck out of it, right? So I used every connection at my disposal. One of the reasons I took this role at Recruiting and moved to San Diego was because of the founding investor, a woman named Carol Gallagher. She has now actually just retired from her venture capital firm and is now an independent member of my board. But she recruited me into the role, and we'd had a mentoring relationship for several years prior to that. And so she's here in San Diego. So I said, Carol, can you help connect me to the biotech industry here? And she did. So she made probably, I would say 10 different connections and connected me with people and said, hey, Nancy's new. Would you be interested in connecting with her? And then I would say, would you meet for coffee? Right. So had coffee with Zach Hornby from Boundless Bio, had coffee with Rich Heyman, who's a biotech legend here in San Diego, and a whole bunch of others. And then I figured out that I was like, what's the local trade group, right, that I can plug into? And so Biocom California is based here, and was able to get connected into them, went to a few of their events, got to know some people, and from that continued to grow my network. So just making a conscious effort to connect into the environment is really great. And then the last thing I would say is I was very fortunate to be connected to a woman named Angie Yu, who is now the CEO of a company called Architect Therapeutics here in San Diego. But she had previously, prior to me meeting her, she's one of the 3 founders of the Biotech CEO Sisterhood, which is this amazing group of female biotech CEOs. There's over 250 of us that are connected in some way or not another. And through that, was able to connect in with a bunch of the female CEOs here in San Diego. And that has been really rewarding and helpful to make those connections. So Sarah Boyce, who's CEO of Avidity, and Sheila Gujarathy, and Kira Kennedy, and others. And so, finding your niche, finding your people, if you will, and then connecting locally has been really helpful. People tell you when you take your first CEO role that the CEO job is really lonely. And I've sort of thought that's like, wah, wah, really, it's lonely, but you're the CEO, right? But actually it is really lonely. And it is really important to have your professional network of people who you can talk to, and you can say, hey, I've got this problem. How have you dealt with it? Or even just like logistical things, because I was new to the city. I didn't know kind of where to do things, or great local vendors for things. And so building that network early, connecting into people who were, doing the same things. Even like my first year, I remember we're trying to figure out like, how does San Diego's salaries compare to Bay Area salaries, right? And so immediately I had 4 different CEOs I could pick up the phone and call, and they were able to tell me, well, here's how I think about it. And so it was super important from a business perspective. It was super important from a personal perspective. I'm a pretty outgoing person. I wanted to be connected to the local ecosystem and learn from folks. And so just was intentional about it and used every lever I had and jumped right in.
That's awesome.
You talked about the thing that you heard a couple of weeks ago about pioneers and settlers, and something I heard recently too, Nancy, is that your network is your net worth. And not necessarily, I don't interpret that as what shows up on my bank statement, but more so the community that's around me, the community that believes in me and how I'm able to pour into them, and perhaps how they're able to pour into me. So that's something that really kept on top of mind over the last several weeks. That it's not what can you do for me, but how can I help you? And then the dividend of that is there's some reciprocity there, but that's not the intention behind that. So we really appreciate you sharing that.
Feeling connected and part of a community is so important. And I think,
It's critical.
Like there are some folks who who I think really loved the isolation that came
Hmm.
with COVID, and
Hmm.
that's great. I was not one of those people. I really needed connection and community, and I love being in the office. But I also love the flexibility that we have with, with a hybrid work environment that we have at Recruitix that allows people to flex when they need to or when they want to. But building that community, being able to, see people, talk to people, ask their thoughts, ask their advice. And then also, yeah, of course, like I'm, happy to talk to anybody, and if there's anything that I can help them with, I of course will do it. It just builds that greater connection, and it just gives you confidence that, okay, there's a problem. Well, who do I know in my
Hmm.
network who's dealt with this previously, who can help me, right? Like what we're trying to do, I put this on a post on LinkedIn last week, and, you know, um, our competition is disease. It's not other companies trying to
Yes,
do this,
so true.
right?
Yes.
Like we are trying to solve serious health challenges and serious diseases. That's our competitor, right? We can help each
That's
other,
right.
and we
Yeah.
should, right? And we do, and
Yeah.
that's what I try to do.
Well said. Well said. I know, admittedly, I can lose sight of that at some point, and it's sometimes a challenge to see the forest through the trees, but that's perfect. Well said. Wow.
Ooh,
Well, I have learned a ton, Sean. I don't know about you, but any opportunity I have to spend time with Nancy, I come away
absolutely.
much better than I came into the conversation. I feel
Yeah.
once again inspired and invigorated, and I got more tools on my tool belt for sure. Thank you for sharing your insights around leadership, around the opportunities that you see, what your forecast really kind of is laying out over the next 2 to 3 years. And I do feel that we're moving into a place of shifting from headwinds to a lot of tailwinds. And certainly, if we keep that in focus, Nancy, that we're fighting the disease, we're fighting against that and not amongst each other, and able to lock arms. That's when we're going to really see us achieve collective milestones together in an expedited fashion. So thank you so much. And in a landscape and a dynamic where people are really moving um, much quicker than they were 2 to 3 years ago, your best practices, your insights of how to get assimilated into a community, I think, are invaluable. So thanks so much. Wow, Sean. Well, another great episode of Thoroughly Thriving. I'm going to have to take some time to digest all the things that I learned today. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. And Nancy, we just want to thank you again for taking the time out of your very busy day, continuing to build and grow an incredible organization. We really know that you and your team are doing incredible work, and we're just so thankful to spend some time with you today. We'll be putting some additional things in the show notes for everyone, inclusive of even, I know Nancy mentioned a book for the 7 pillars of servant leadership. We'll make sure we put a link in there as well where you can find that. But Nancy, thank you again. It's been such a pleasure and an honor, and we are cheering you and the Recruitix team on toward greater heights and greater successes, ultimately for the patients in need, that you're going to continue to work toward breakthroughs for those folks. So, anyways, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're excited to
Yeah.
see where you guys take the road ahead.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. And Nancy, we have a mantra, we have an ethos here at the Thorough Group, and that is to work as one and win as one. So we're looking forward to doing that moving forward. And stay tuned for the next episode of Thoroughly Thriving. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today for another great episode of Thoroughly Thriving. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to share it with those in your world. If you'd like to learn more about the Thorough Group, please go to thoroughgroup.com, and remember that we will all remain thoroughly thriving if we continue to work as one and win as one.